Well, hello. My name is Ripley Atkinson. I'm the Australian Meats and Livestock Manager for StoneX, based in Sydney, Australia, where we're developing price risk management tools for the Australian livestock industry to help the sector manage market and price volatility with our Australian feeder cattle forward contract. Today, I'm going to get in and discuss, I think, with how much is going on geopolitically around the world. Recently, overnight, we've seen the Trump administration under Section 301 announce that tariffs will be reimposed on importing countries around the globe for product and trade that is done with the United States. Fortunately, Australia has avoided tariffs on its beef exports into America. But I think with so much going on globally at a macro level in global beef markets outside of Australia, I felt it important to share today what we're seeing currently from a Australian domestic processor profitability level, and ultimately what that's going to transpire to in terms of what it means for global markets and availability of Australian beef, and how that then may impact the potential for what will be large numbers of Australian cattle supply made available to processors, whether those cattle are actually processed or not in 2026. Now, the forecast from the H2 StoneX Australian Cattle and Beef Market Outlook Report is that cattle slaughter is forecast to reach its third highest level on record, or since records began in 1972. And that forecast of 9.85 million is really not underpinned, but it's really important to acknowledge that processor profitability here in Australia will have a major bearing and determinant on whether that 9.85 million figure of the number of cattle processed actually occurs or not. Now, why this is important? I think a little bit of context to acknowledge that in the past couple of months, what we've seen is values for Australian beef in export markets begin to decline. There's a number of reasons for that, and the prices that exporters are receiving because of these sort of macro dynamics are causing values to fall. I'll begin with the first one, and that has a lot to do with increased competition from Brazil and Argentina in major export markets or Australia exports to, namely the United States, but then also countries across Asia more broadly as well. So we're seeing this increased supply and availability of product from Brazil and Argentina in the same types of markets Australia exports to, and that increased supply at a comparatively lower price is challenging Australia. Now, the second reason here is also some consumer price fatigue out of the American market. For Australia, for the last 2 years, it's accounted for about 30% of our exports. And what we've seen is some pushback from the American consumer around their willingness to pay these high prices for beef. Finally, two of Australia's fourth largest markets by both value and volume, and that is South Korea and China. We both have limitations. Australia's access to those markets is limited under safeguard quota limits. We've hit both of those. South Korea was as recent as this week, and we hit China last month. That effectively means that Australia doesn't have access to two of its four largest markets on both a value and volume perspective. Now, that creates a tension and the ability of other countries to try and, or importing nations of Australian beef to try and push the market down. Now, why this is all relevant, there's a lot of detail there which, may seem not very related to what's going on domestically, but I think it's also important now to couple this with Australian cattle prices at the same time that we've seen challenges in the export markets from the factors I just mentioned. Australian cattle prices have risen anywhere between 20, 30 and 40% in the last 2 to 3 months. So the challenge here for the Australian beef processor is the fact that meat prices are coming down and cattle prices are going up. And what that's doing is squeezing the margin and the availability of profit for those Australian beef processors to actually make. So what we're now left with is this dynamic where we're looking towards the next 6 months of 2026's calendar year. And export beef prices, or the value those processors are receiving, is falling. Cattle prices are now in decile 9 and 10 levels, and that crunch on margin will have a really big impact on whether Australia sees really large numbers of cattle processed this year. And what I mean by that is the market needs to rebalance, and the forecast of 9.8 million for Australia, or 9.8 million head to be processed in Australia this year, is actually all about processors' financial stability and whether they're profitable. It's actually not to do with cattle supply here in Australia. There's ample number of stock available to be processed, but it's really about how the export markets and global macro factors collide and interact with domestic cattle prices, and how that balance can be found. If it can't, then the forecast for 9.85 million may be challenged, because that's just business. If you're losing money, it's not justifiable to continue doing what you're doing, and that's the potential situation we're going to be presented with here in Australia. That's all for this episode. But if you want to hear more information like this, make sure you head to Apple or Spotify and search for the Australian Cattle and Beef Market Report. Now, this is our fortnightly podcast, which discusses all things Australian cattle and beef markets, local prices, supply, demand, exports, and other global factors or local factors that influence and are in relation to the Australian market. But if you are enjoying that podcast or this episode, make sure to like and subscribe on either your favorite listening platform or on YouTube. But other than that, thank you for listening. And until next time, take care. Cheers.